come in and read. So the texts I'm reading weren't necessarily prepared for tonight, but they do have some trace of Bachmann in them. I think maybe I'll start with a very short translation of a poem, and then I will read from a slightly longer prose piece that's from a book I'm working on at the moment about my family history. So half my family are Austrian, and I've been looking at a great uncle of mine who had schizophrenia, and his art was collected and studied by Hans Prinzhorn. And I'm also looking at my grandfather, who was an evolutionary biologist, and the prose piece is about family memories, language, history, and all of that, through my own memories of a childhood spent in Innsbruck in the summers and winters there. I'll get to that in a moment. So this is a translation of Im Krieg by Bachmann, and I've called it Hymn War. Nights eat, lone dread, walls squeeze, bread tears, colds bloom, fires light, breath smokes, hope break, roads tear, voice call, sick heart eats night. Okay, and that was a really apt excerpt that you read, Stephen, about memory and casting a net over your own sort of memories. And so this piece is a little story about remembering the cellar in my grandparents' house in Innsbruck, and how I used to sneak down into the cellar to scare myself, because it was just this sort of log cellar where there were bits of wood and there was dust and not much else, and it sort of, in my own memory, it's kind of become a bit of a symbolic space. And so I started writing this as a fairly straightforward memory piece, but then I was also watching the recent series of Twin Peaks, and that kind of completely changed it. I won't read it all, so I'll just read a moment where I've sort of gone through the wall and I'm in this snowy alpine landscape, and I come across a cabin where I encounter a figure who might be a composite of my great uncle and my grandfather and myself, or my unconscious, or whatever. I heard my homunculus whispering, caught somewhere between English and German. The dying high world, overlost, the vanishing mad trip, the day trip taken, extracted from here on us, the with, the rose, in a broken year, the home known nowhere. I didn't fully understand, but I somehow felt what it meant. The heaven was the earth, and everything was in between. Snow and life slipping into dark portals, a shudder under the mountain arch, remembered but unfamiliar, anamnesis from nowhere. I turned back to the open doorway and entered the cabin. The wind yelped and slammed the door behind me. The room was slowly illuminated by a warm, whiskey-brown light. There was a figure sitting at a table in the centre. I heard the sound of their voice fade in from the silence. They had been speaking the whole time, but I'd only just noticed. It was like a conversation taking place between one voice. Their eyes looked right through me. I couldn't decide whether I was involved in the conversation or not. And this was how we always knew we were speaking, the figure continued. The movements are always too subtle to notice. They begin with the fingers and any other febrile vertices ready to receive. That's how the spine can read. It's the simplest method of experience. The vertebrae move in the same key as the shimmering coral until they burst into a coalescence of red dyes and purple inks. Sometimes the molecules fizz, but the entrance always opens on the second knock. The head is phosphorus and burns itself up. Just don't spend any money on it if you want to maintain your feet. They can't look themselves up today. The figure was the most rational entity in the room. Their speech was endless. They spoke with the calm authority of a seasoned expert. I attempted to engage with the figure because I felt included in their speech. I know it had all been intended for me, but the moment I opened my mouth, the voice continued speaking. There's never any more than 4, they said. We've absorbed the remnants into our work and taken up the steerage. It flattens after a season of gulps. We were all trying to get back and discovered the answers on the way. There's a stitch along the route. It splits about the middle and thins towards the top. We can demonstrate through the silence, but it has to be warm before anything happens. We've collected skins and concepts, a dozen horses and several grapes. When you were 6, you wanted a rat tail. Together they mix and blend, but the taste is nothing near static. You thought it was an Austrian thing. They can be accessed with the right set. Otherwise, there's a way to unlock that doesn't spin out of control when the agents converge. The blood will bubble only if it's boiled. In the future, drawing will no longer be necessary. Graphite can be smeared across a page and particles will form into lines with pure ocular scrutiny. Telepathy renders a speech superfluous. Lines of force radiate from the central polarity. All bodies are attuned to this geological vibration in which history is creased, but the regular flow of the body is set in opposition to its radiance. It can, however, be reversed with a singular graphite constellation. If the curved is traced with the neck, the head will follow, and therefore Napoleon. Language is nothing but the curve of its gesture. Sucht die Wolke nach Worten und füllt den Krater mit Schweigen, as said Ingeborg's cloud in her silent crater, the point of burning, the focal point. History rests, waiting for a footprint to rekindle. Eventually, like that, there will be an Archimedean point, obscured by observation. Beobachtung, Bauchtalker, he has found it, but only to turn itself against himself. The voice that people usually call silence will re-emerge, noting nothing. It's never been lost, only remembered in the silence of atrocity. It's rare to speak without it, but as you know, of course, it can be done. The voice stopped speaking. I was taken aback. The figure had paused to address me directly, apparently waiting for my response. Without what? I asked. Oh, but I doubt you've forgotten. It's always been there, silked around the teeth. Another pause. The gum? I asked. Tooth flesh and the tongue, they said. You could do it smoothly when you were young. To demonstrate, the figure put their left thumb and forefinger into their mouth, twisted their wrist like dislodging a retainer, and pulled their tongue out. They placed it on the table, a dark purple slab, and their eyes finally met mine. Remember, it's freely detachable. Everything about this seemed to make sense. It was like I had forgotten my legs and they were simply reminding me of the obvious by telling me to walk. Of course the tongue is detachable. Only in a world turned on its head would it be fixed inside your jaw. I followed the figure's example and placed my own fingers inside my mouth. Unhooking the rings of flesh and from around the molars, I lifted the muscle from its bed and pulled it out. It was surprisingly dry and without smell. I placed it on the table opposite the other tongue as I let the cold air fill the enlarged hollow between my jaws. Relive it in a curve. I couldn't tell whether this voice was mine or theirs. The two tongues sat on the table, flat and neutral. I looked up at the figure's face. Do you remember the shift from short to long, the bend of the diphthong? I looked back at the tongues, and to my surprise, one had moved into a hunched-up position, like it was making a velar phoneme at the back of the mouth. I looked back at their face. It was smeared with graphite. Talk to the stones with your teeth. Returning to the tongues, I saw that they were both hunched up, like cats arching their backs at each other. The figure continued to look at me. Katzenbuckel. There is no bilingual poetry. You'll have to learn how to forget to speak it. And this is when the smell returned, the static smell with no memory. I closed my eyes and tried to take everything in and make sense of it. I inhaled until my lungs filled with the cold air, holding the breath until I had to exhale, and as the cool air flowed into the chamber, I could feel my tongue again, somehow reattached, wagging through the warming air. When I tried to open my eyes, it was as though I hadn't closed them in the first place. Again, everything black, full, dark, and silent. Figure, voice, and table had disappeared. I was in a smaller room, a space with hard walls surrounded by coal. Slowly, through the static, the cold smell of grey returned, rising up from the ashy dust at my feet. I could taste the green earth through the concrete. The contours of the cellar came out from the dark, and I could feel the wall to my right with my fingers again. My heart stammered, and the serenity with which I had re-emerged was suddenly torn apart by a shot of terror that made my knees jolt and propelled me back up the wooden stairs. Bottle lost, chicken fled. I ran through the wood chamber and out into the garden. The sun had risen, yellow and bright, above the valley, and the snow on the mountains was glistening.